Now, the rest of the story. It was coming. Crusty old Captain Colon could feel it in his bones. And there were other signs as well, or at least so he thought, to impress the younger seamen of the crew. There were the long, oily waves rolling in from the southeast. There was the peculiar, unevenly rising tide. There was the inexplicable squalls that would rise angrily and subside suddenly, and the veiled cirrus clouds rushing in with remarkable speed across the sky. And look out there, the captain insisted, pointing a gnarly finger over the bow. And indeed, there did seem to be more seals and more porpoises in the vicinity in these recent hours. But mainly, Captain Colon felt it in his bones. For along with the humid, heavy, oppressive, almost palpable atmosphere came the telltale aching in his rheumatic joints. Severe as it had been off the coast of Sanoa many summers past, and on Hispaniola 2 autumns after that, he remembered it well. And it was coming again. The most dreaded phenomenon a sailor can encounter. The old captain's lips trembled even to utter the word, Urukan. Urukan. And then as his fretful eyes glanced toward the horizon, he glanced toward Port Santo Domingo. They must be warned, he declared to his first mate. Promptly a dinghy was dispatched with news of the coming storm. But upon receiving the message, the island's governor, Ovando, broke out laughing. In fact, it amused him so that he read it aloud to his lieutenants, who also responded uproariously. Captain Colon, the old fool. He ought to be hauled into permanent dry dock, they exclaimed. He'd always been a little soft in the head, and now he was casting himself in the role of a prophet and a soothsayer and a foreseer of storms. When the sarcastic merriment had died down, Governor Ovando sent a reproachful reply to the captain, who was lingering at the harbor's entrance. It said, in effect, go away. A fleet of 30 vessels bearing a fortune in gold was preparing to sail out from the Ozama River and head for home. There was no time right now to play silly games with the demented old seafarer, so Captain Colon heaved a sigh and set sail, and eventually he anchored in a remote spot off the island's leeward shore. And there he safely rode out the fury of the storm which he had known would come. But this is the rest of the story. The floor of the Caribbean is laden with treasure. Countless tons of gold and silver and gems deposited there over centuries past by the same recurring terror, the Huracan. We call them hurricanes. The fleet of 30 ships sent out by Hispaniola's Governor Ovando in June of 1502 was torn to shreds by one such. Somewhere among that wreckage, scattered for miles along the Mona Passage, is a gold nugget the size of a dinner plate, but now it's gone, perhaps forever, along with the bones of hundreds of officers and crew, because nobody heeded the warning of a has-been sea captain who'd seen the Huracan twice before and who knew what it could do and who could feel its approach in his bones. A wise old Italian explorer, now fallen so far from Spain's royal favor that he was not even permitted to take refuge in the harbor at Santo Domingo, on the island which he had discovered 10 years previous. Of course, back then, he was a hero, named Cristobal Colon, and then later distrusted and ridiculed as an admiral whom history reveres as Christopher Columbus. And now you know the rest of the story.
And now the rest of the story. I was always taught that Christopher Columbus was an important part of our history. But should he be remembered? In this broadcast, Mr. Harvey explained that the governor of Hispaniola was Nicolas de Ovando, but there's much more to this story. We need to look back at the 2 previous governors of Hispaniola. The first governor of Hispaniola was Christopher Columbus. You remember the old rhyme, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue? Well, in August 1492, Columbus left Castile, Spain on his first of 4 voyages to what would later be called the Americas, with 3 ships, and made landfall in the Americas on October 12, 1492. We refer to the period prior to October 12 as the pre-Columbian era. In that same year, 1492, Columbus became the first governor of the Indies, also known as Hispaniola. Today, we refer to it as the Dominican Republic. Despite evidence to the contrary, Columbus claimed that he had reached Asia and not the so-called New World. 9 years later, an Italian explorer by the name of Vespucci sailed to the Americas and recognized it as the New World. In 1507, cartographer Martin Waldseemüller created a map based on Vespucci's claim. He named this new world after Vespucci, and mapmakers have followed suit ever since. Vespucci's first name was Amerigo, and that's why we call the continent America and not some form of Christopher Columbus's name. Had Columbus accepted the fact that he had not reached Asia, that he had reached the New World, we may refer to our country not as the United States of America, but the United States of Columbia. Now, back to 1492. I said earlier that Columbus became governor of Hispaniola in 1492. He served as governor until 1499. In August 1499, Columbus returned to Hispaniola from Spain and found the settlers in rebellion against his rule. Columbus had some of the rebels arrested for disobedience, and at least one rebel leader was hanged. Columbus's attempt to quell the rebellion only fueled it. In an act of desperation, Columbus sent 2 ships back to Spain in October 1499 with a letter in which Columbus asked for a royal commissioner to help him govern Hispaniola. But King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain had received word that Columbus was governing as a tyrant and was just utterly incompetent. Rumors persisted that Columbus treated the natives with horrendous brutality. The court sent Francisco de Bobadilla, a close friend of Queen Isabella, to investigate. When Francisco reached Santo Domingo, Hispaniola, he received numerous complaints about the brutality of Christopher Columbus and his 2 brothers, or that's what he said anyway. By authority of the court, Francisco seized Columbus's property, moved into his house, and declared himself governor on August 23, 1500. Columbus, his 2 brothers, and his son Diego were arrested and returned to Spain to face the court. After months in jail, they were eventually released due to lack of evidence, and their wealth was restored. The court recalled Francisco and ordered him to make restitution for the property he had taken from Columbus. The court did not restore Columbus's status as governor, though. On September 3, 1501, Nicolas de Ovando replaced Francisco as the governor of Hispaniola. Over 500 years later, historians still argue over Columbus's guilt or innocence. On February 13, 1502, Ovando sailed from Spain with a fleet of 30 ships, the largest fleet that had ever sailed to the New World. Aboard those 30 ships were approximately 2,500 colonists. Ovando and his 30-ship fleet reached Santo Domingo 2 months later and found the natives in revolt. The rumors of Christopher Columbus's tyrannical rule, if they were true, were nothing compared to the brutality of Governor Ovando's administration. One estimate gave the population of Hispaniola before the Spanish arrived at around 500,000, 500,000 people. When the Spanish took a census in 1507, during Ovando's administration, the native population had dropped to around 60,000 people due to battlefield slaughter, disease, and enslavement. In May 1502, 3 months after Ovando reached Santo Domingo, Christopher Columbus left Spain for the New World with a fleet of 4 ships, including the now famous flagship Santa Maria. The hurricane that Mr. Harvey told us about formed in June 1502. Columbus and his fleet of 4 ships reached Santo Domingo on June the 29th, but were denied the safety of the port at the mouth of the Osama River. Columbus tried to warn Ovando about the approaching hurricane, but Ovando disregarded his warnings as the ravings of a madman. Columbus sailed his ships westward and up into the Jaina River. All of Columbus's ships survived the hurricane with only minimal damage. Once Ovando realized that Columbus's hurricane warnings were true, he tried to send his 30 ships to safer ports. 20 of the 30 ships in Ovando's fleet were totally destroyed, but the loss was greater than gold, silver, or the ships themselves. Ovando's decision cost the lives of about 500 people. One of those who died was Francisco de Bobadilla, the former governor who had Columbus arrested. The ships which remained were damaged and straggled back to Santo Domingo, except for one fragile ship called the Aguja. Remember when I said that Columbus was released and his wealth was restored and Francisco was ordered to pay restitution? Well, the Aguja, the only ship among Ovondo's fleet of 30 ships to make it back to Spain, carried Christopher Columbus's personal belongings and his 4,000 pesos in gold. Some people claim supernatural forces were to blame. There were rumors that Christopher Columbus had somehow magically invoked the hurricane out of vengeance. In 1509, Governor Ovando was recalled to Spain to answer for his treatment of the native people. He never returned to the New World. In Ovondo's place, King Ferdinand appointed Diego Columbus, Christopher's son, as governor. Now, in recent years, controversy has affected Christopher Columbus's legacy. During the protests and riots following the murder of George Floyd in 2020, many public monuments of Christopher Columbus in America were destroyed during the riots. On June the 9th, 2020, rioters toppled, set fire to, and dumped the remains of the statue of Christopher Columbus that stood in Richmond, Virginia, in a nearby lake. On the following day, rioters toppled another statue of Columbus in St. Paul, Minnesota. On June the 11th, city officials in Boston, Massachusetts, removed a statue of Columbus after protesters decapitated it. Also on June the 11th, officials in Camden, New Jersey, Houston, Texas, and New London, Connecticut removed statues of Columbus. Between June the 12th and November the 1st, 2020, 32 more memorials to Christopher Columbus in the United States were removed, destroyed, or renamed to remove any linkage to Christopher Columbus. Now, what do you think? Should we remember Christopher Columbus, or should we erase him from history? I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching. And now you know the rest of the story.